All right, well, I give people just another moment to hop on. Sorry, let's see. Okay, sorry. I went to go get the link to the peer critique form, and a bunch of emails had come in and then they distracted me. So, all right. I'm gonna silence that. All right. Peer critique form is going in the chat for later. And yeah, we got one more person joining. Okay, so today we're going to talk more about data, graphics. This is going to be, a lot of this is going to just be a recap of last time. And then I'm going to go over some stuff related to research and citations. And both of these PowerPoints are already available in the course content folder of Blackboard. So I will not be sending them out. They are already there in the Unit 7 course content folder. So with that, of course, you can hear my dog. She always has to do something noisy when I'm going on camera. Oh, hold on, one more person just entered. I'm just making note. Okay, so with that, writing about data. So to review the purpose of the assignment, and in theory, this PowerPoint, I should have done this last week after our data exercise. And obviously I didn't get to it, but there's a lot of recap in here of things I've already told you. They were supposed to go together, but probably review is good. So the purpose of the assignment is for you to present numerical data in a clear and professional manner. I just sounded real Great Lakesy right there. You're going to introduce your data by providing details about the source and explicitly defining the column and if necessary, the row labels. You're going to make decisions about the best type of graph to help you answer your research question. And, you know, since I've given you the research question, I've given you one that I've thought that, you know, is generally answerable. But, you know, you may, because conditions change, right? Like I asked you about, you know, price data. And since conditions always do change, they've definitely changed from when I first wrote this question. You might get to the end and say, you know what, like this is not answerable. Like now I don't think this is true, right? I mean, but hypothetically, you could say the price of roofing tiles across the board is so high right now that nothing is going to be within budget at all. Now, again, I already know that's not true, but that is hypothetically something that could happen. Okay. Yeah, prices do vary a lot. So, you know, okay. So now again, I have formulated the research question for you, but there are things you do need to consider, such as what data do you need in order to answer the question? We've already gone over some of that. What is your scope? What is the range of your data? You know, so for example, I've limited you no more than five roofing types that you're looking at. No more than 5. I gave you a range of 3 to 5. By the way, tip, this came up in my class yesterday. You know, I had a student who's like, I've got 5 and I'm having a lot of trouble finding the last 2. I'm like, you only need to have 3. I only ask, like, you can do the minimum. It's okay. Like, there's no extra points for having 5. I literally gave 5 just like because some people really like, they're like 3, that's too few. Oh my God, I'm so sad. So you can do the minimum. You do not get more points if you do 5. So if you're having trouble with 5, cut out 2 of them. Cut out the 2 that you're having the most trouble with. Oops. I'm sorry, I was trying to click on the chat. Aiden, we can discuss that after the peer critique, because that might be a that might be a math, like that might be a weird math conversion thing. Yeah, let's discuss that after peer critique, and just make note of where you got your data from, because again, like sometimes people do not share data in consistent units of measure. So I had a student on Tuesday who was running into that, and it was like he was looking at prices from 2 different sources. They were not using consistent units of measure, and this was causing problems. It's not a problem that's necessarily hard to overcome. You just need to know you need to just know what's going on. So anyway, yeah, so I've limited you from 3 to 5. You know, you might exclude things that, you know, you might in your research say, like, look, this is never going to be in budget. We're not even going to look at it because there's no point. Like, clearly the price is way out of budget. You might, or, you know, you might say, well, we're looking at things, and in my research, I've determined that, like, I've just noticed incidentally, like, this type of material is not good for this climate. So I'm just not even going to bother, because what's the point of investing in something that's not good for the climate? I mean, again, people do, doesn't mean you should. So it is, but so even though I provided the research question, it is, you know, your job to clarify the necessary data and the scope in your report. Of course, you got to locate the data, and we did a chunk of that last week, looking at trade journals in the library, and also looking at, you know, retail sites for prices online. And you do have to include at least 2 graphics, 1 table, and 1 graph. So here we are diverting from the way we have initially captioned graphics in this class. And you're going to be, some of you are probably like, but you already told us another way. Why are we changing it? We're changing it because we're looking now at a different type of graphic entirely. And so we actually have to change the method up. So previously, what were we looking at? Drawings, photos, maps, maybe a flow chart, things that were just like straight up visual representations of actual life. That's it, just total visual representations. So what the original, you know, labeling and formatting system we were using was fine, because that worked for what kind of graphics we were using. But here, for this assignment, we're using graphics that are, I mean, yes, they're visual, right? You have to look at them, but they're data driven. It's not like a photo of a stage of a recipe, or a map of a route, or a diagram of the inside of a car's engine. It's data, it's numbers. And they're numbers you didn't, you know, generally they're numbers you didn't like generate yourself. I mean, you look them up, right? But you're not like, none of you are like none of you are like the economists who are out there like creating the pricing data through their research. I mean, honestly, it's probably just an algorithm. I don't think people actually do that, right? But but you're not like doing research to like, and you're not doing the calculations to figure out what things are supposed to cost. You are getting the costs of them, but you're not doing the work to generate the numbers themselves. So so you're working with numbers, and you're working with someone else's information. So this by its nature does change what we're, you know, the graphic. Also, you know, I do expect you're going to make your own graphics. Yes, this is one I got from the internet, but I use that because it's labeled in a nice way. It's well labeled, so it is a good teaching tool. So that's why I went with it. So Now, a lot of similarities. We still have to have a number. So here we do say table 1 instead of figure 1. That's a standard convention to illustrate something as a table. So table 1, we've got the title. So you've seen this before with our photos and line drawings. It just looks a little different. Table 1, then you've got the title. You could, in theory, I mean, not in theory, you could, it would be fine if you put these on the same line if you had room. So if your title was short enough, you could run them on the same line. That would be okay. Now, if your title is long and it sort of like breaks halfway through, just put it on 2 separate lines to make it look nicer. All right, then we've got the headers for each column, what grade they're in, whether they're monolingual or multilingual. We've got the body, which includes each grade and the number of students in each grade. And then we have this special row for the total, which can go under the grade column because we don't need to total the grades, right? Like these numbers don't need to be totaled. That would not be helpful. We just need to total these numbers. One thing to note is, yes, there are no grid lines in this table here. That's a pretty common aesthetic decision right now. Having grid lines is not inherently wrong, so don't worry about it. You can have them. And I'll say there are certain types of like scientific citation systems that would expect you to take all these grid lines away, but for real, you don't need to worry about that for this class. If you want to do it and you know how to do it, great, but don't feel like you have to. Grid lines are perfectly fine, and whether they're left in or taken out is yeah, it sort of depends on just like the specific style guide in the situation. Different, whether it's like MLA, APA, Chicago, a science style, and engineering style, there are just different rules. Okay, and then finally, you have to include a note here. So rather than doing, so I'll just go, adapted from example book by J. Smith, 2016, page 115. Now, don't worry about a copyright notice. They put a copyright notice in because, it's their intellectual property, and then they want to make sure, that's maintained, but you do not need a copyright notice. So I'm going to cross it out, not because it matters, but like, I don't want you to think you need one. So we put the note down here because, remember, it's not like we lifted someone else's chart and stuck it in there. We used their data to build their own chart. We adapted their data to build their own chart. So this is why we structure the label and the citation differently, because it's not literally someone else's graphic. It's our table based on someone else's data. It is important to introduce the table in your writing before it shows up. I mean, you can build the table before you write about it. That's fine. But you still put the table, and there still needs to be some writing that talks about some of like the key terms and explains the table in a little bit of detail before the reader looks at it. And again, you need that table label or that table number. You need a title. And you need the note with the citation in basic APA. You could say, retrieved from, adapted from, things like that. And you will still need to include a reference list, even though this note contains a lot of the same information, because the reader still needs to know where to find that. I will talk about the reference list shortly. So, all right, creating your figure. Again, use APA format, and the type of figure you use should make sense in the context of your research question. So again, this is a review from last week. Line graphs, best for tracking changes over time. Bar graphs compare between different groups or track changes over time, but they're better for larger spans of time. Area graphs, good to use when you are tracking changes in 2 or more related groups that make a whole category, like public versus private schools. XY plots determine relationship between 2 variables. Now, and as I said last week, that if you're going to use this, it's best when you're comparing things that have the same units of measure. So we're not really using the same units of measure to compare for our different factors. So probably an XY plot looks cool, but may not be super useful. Might be useful on something like the final though, maybe. I actually I don't know. I'm like, just remember these. It's a 2-item final. You just pick one or the other. I actually don't remember what the more analytical question is at all. I wrote it back in August, so I'm like, I don't remember what it is anymore. All right, common mistakes that people run into. Naming your assignment, table and figure assignment, or data table assignment, or something else. Give it an actual title that explains what this is about. Not following the outline. I gave you an outline. Follow it. I want you to actually write a real short form report. There are reports of various lengths in industry, but they skew to the short side. Even what's considered long by industry standards is actually considered fairly short by more like academic standards. So follow the outline. Don't make it harder on yourself. I am not impressed when you're like, outlines, I don't need them. In fact, it makes it harder for me to grade, because part of I build the rubric around the outline and how well you maintain the structure I set up for you. So if you're like, no, not going to bother, it is harder for me to grade it, because it is harder for me to assess that you did it well. And again, there are many ways to write these documents, but I'm giving you one common way so you learn a basic structure. It's easier to learn a basic common structure and build out from there, rather than try to just do whatever. Also, it's worthwhile, even if you're not in the habit of using someone else's template or outline. A lot of businesses use templates or standardized outlines or standardized structures. In a lot of business and technical and scientific writing, a lot of companies use standard templates and standard structures because it makes it easier. It creates a sense of consistency for the brand, for the production team. People use them. So it's good to understand just because I give you a structure, not because I want you to be a parrot, but because there are times when you need to actually be able to follow a structure. Also, look, do you want to write 3 paragraphs like I told you to, or do you want to make it hard on yourself and reach for 6 paragraphs? Write 3. Another common mistake, assuming that the reader is going to know what you mean, and by not defining your column rows or labels. Scientific writing it's all about the precision, all 100% about the precision. Now remember, so for example, I didn't give you a specific definition for durability. I put in the assignment description, I left that up for you to define what durability is. And different students different students have picked different things. So, I have one student who just in a trade journal found a hardness index, and used, based his on that. I have another student who found durability calculations based on expected, life expectancy, how long these tiles were supposed to last in terms of years. And she used that. I had another student he is an engineer, so I don't expect you to do this, but I have a student who is an engineer or a pre-engineering or something. But anyway, already has some engineering under his belt. He actually developed his own calculation to determine hardness. I don't tell you that to intimidate you. I tell you that because I really want to illustrate that you actually need to define what you mean. You should not make assumptions. Again, one student found, someone else's durability index. Another student, that's like on a scale of like hardness. Another student found a base durability on like years it's expected to last. A third just made something up entirely, and it's not, it's not nonsense. It's actually like quite, it's quite good, quite sophisticated. But three different ways to define durability, at least. So you need to define what you mean. So what are the things that need to be defined in this table? You can drop in the chat or you can unmute. Yes. Yeah. All right. People are really on it. We definitely need to define what transmittance is. We definitely need to define what the trials are. And it's a good idea to define salt concentration. It's good to define that because, again, probably some of us in this class already know what salt concentration means. I definitely do. But that doesn't mean everyone who is reading your document does. It's not kind of obvious to everyone. It's kind of obvious to you, but it is not obvious to everyone. And again, that doesn't mean people are stupid. It means like you literally can't know everything. Sorry, just not possible. Except for, I don't know, that blue guy in Watchmen, I guess he knew everything. But he was also like, he was pretty unhappy. So people, like even smart people literally can't know everything. So it doesn't matter how smart you are, you're not going to have all the information in the world. You have not encountered every single thing out there. So you need to define things for your reader because you don't know what experiences they've had that like make them familiar with certain concepts. Yes, Richard, you might want to explain the effect of salt on transmittance. Absolutely. And another thing to note is you cannot realistically define all these in the table. Imagine how cluttered and unreadable this table, like this table is already, kind of complex, right? Because it's got, this is kind of a complex table. Can you imagine how much more complicated it would be if we were trying to define all of the terms in the table itself? Not useful. There's a mosquito in my ear. Cool. Thanks, Texas. You need to, so when I say introduce the table before the table, that's where you define things. That is where you put your definitions. Why is it a useful strategy to put your relevant definitions before the table? Why would we want our definitions to go first rather than after? Yeah, exactly. People need to know what they're looking at. One thing I often do see is people define things, but they're like, well, I'll do the definition after they look at the table. But that doesn't help people understand the table. They need to have the, terms and definitions to understand it going into the reading of it, or else, it is actually harder to look at something and then, have it explained and then go back and look at it. Like it can happen, but that just adds an extra step for the reader. It could make them frustrated. It could make them confused. And, just like we talked about with instructions that, if people get frustrated enough and don't have a compelling need to finish doing something, they'll quit. Likewise, if people get frustrated and don't have a compelling absolute need to like read your document, they're like, I'm out, I'm done. Mistake 4, going over the word count. So I've given you a 500 word maximum. Now, again, if it's like 520 words, like that's okay. But like if it's 650 words, that's a little too much. Think of it this way: the more you go over word count, the more opportunities to make mistakes with commas or capitalization or sentence fragments. You don't want that. If you go way over 500 words, honestly, you're probably overthinking it. Don't overthink it. I know people get kind of like feel kind of squirrely because, again, you're conditioned from other English classes to have to think like, I write a paper and this paper has to be complex and deep. It's like, I mean, in technical writing, things can definitely get complex, but unless you're a hardcore specialist, if you are just a general person in a general job, no, you actually like it literally doesn't have to be that complex. It literally has to be simple. So if your word count is well over 500, consider the following. Anything, the information in your table or your citations, that does not count. So if you're at like 550 and you mouse over your table and you find that I don't think it counts whether or not it counts numbers as words depends. Like literally different word processors count words in different ways. Anyway, or at least they used to, maybe they fixed that, but yeah, you don't have to count the info in your table or in your citations. And then ask yourself, is every sentence necessary? Is every word in this sentence necessary? Am I including more information than the assignment is asking? So the second point here is a good one. I ran into this in another class, and I had a student who was over a little more than I would have liked. And, he took a second look at his sentences, and he's someone who has been trained to write in passive voice because of, the field he's in, which again, we don't want to do in tech writing generally. And passive voice usually adds an average of 2 words per sentence, which, 2 word, if you think, 2 words, what's the big deal? Well, if you have a 500 word limit and every sentence is 2 words longer than it would be if you'd written in active voice, those 2 words are going to put you over the limit. So, one of the things he realized is he could go back and, rework most of his he didn't have to rewrite the whole paper. He just had to put the passive sentences in active voice, and it kind of just took care of the problem. It's right away. Let's see. Oh, something in the chat. Yeah, I mean, I know sometimes the average is 12 pages. It depends. I'm asking you to try to keep it to 500 because I want you to practice brevity. 12 pages is too many pages. So also, am I including more than the assignment is asking? Price, durability, 2 things. So you'll have opportunity to get more complex in the assignment after this, but just keep it to 2 things. Suddenly adding new information in the final analysis paragraph that is not in your table or figure. Usually this is an attempt to, answer the research question. And I understand the desire to want to, answer the research question super definitively, but all of the information in here should only relate to the table and the figure. That's all. We do not need to bring any other information in for this assignment. If for some reason you do find you don't have the data to answer the research question, that's science. One of the reasons that some of these reports exist is to avoid making a bad decision due to insufficient information. And I know we are trained to say, like, I don't want to, like, we're trained to not want to be wrong. Like, we think it's a failure to be wrong. But what's a bigger failure? Like writing a report that says there is insufficient data to answer the question, or coming up with something and then making a poor decision and then wasting time and money and human power going after something that was not going to work out. It's easier to just say there's not enough evidence. And we all have to admit we were wrong. We all do. Like, I literally had to do this on Tuesday with my advanced editing class, because, so standards change over time. Some of you are close to my age, and so you probably know that for years, you had to type 2 spaces after a period. Years. My whole life, that was what you did. Then I finished my first grad program. I went into a nonprofit job where I was writing a lot of analytical research reports, and all of a sudden, like literally, like what my whole career, my whole life, 2 spaces after a period. No, now you only type 1 space after a period. So, and that's the standard now. So standards do change. That was not the issue I had last week. The issue was, I had learned certain conventions for formatting numbers like back in high school and college. And I had, I've been using them that way since high school and college, a long time. Well, so I was preparing, we were talking about numbers in my editing class. And, I'm doing, I'm going and making my PowerPoint, and I'm checking on things. And I see that the standard I have been using since high school and college, people aren't using anymore, especially in the sciences. In journalism, sure, but not in the kinds of writing that students who take my technical editing class are doing. So I actually had to go and say, hey, you remember how I said that? And actually, I think I've probably done it in this class too. I say, if a number is less than 10, you spell out the word. Well, I think that is still true for journalism, but in science writing, it's if the number is, it's now this change. I don't know when it changed, but it did. The standard now is if it's less than, if the number is less than 11, you spell out the word. So for my whole life, I've been, doing 10 as a numeral. And at some point along the way, I was supposed to stop doing that and didn't know. And like, I've been telling students that. So I actually had to go, hey, what I told you the second week of the semester, turns out that's not true anymore. I did not like admitting that. No one likes admitting they're wrong, but the fact is that it's better to be honest than pretend that, than pretend that standards haven't changed or pretend that you have all of the information. So it is okay. And I have had students, I have given different iterations or styles of this type of report over time. And I had one student who, this is a few years ago, and he came to me, he's like, my research showed this is the paper was due in like 5 days. He's like, I've got to start over. Like, there's no possible way my idea can work. I'm like, no, that's the point. The point is to do the research and be able to say, no, I was wrong in a professional way. Yes, sometimes you're right, but sometimes you're wrong. That's the way it goes. So in theory, one might also just reformulate your research question, but I didn't always assign the research question, but I started doing that because so many students come to this class having only written one type of research report, and that's a persuasive essay, that people were kind of lost for what to pick as a research question. I really love like letting you have open topics for sure. But so many students were just kind of honestly lost in terms of how to pick an appropriate research question. So I started giving one. For the assignment after this, you will have the option to pick your own research question. I will provide one, but if you don't like it, you can pick your own. But for this first one, I just wanted to give one because this is a really unfamiliar genre for a lot of students. And it's not really doing you any good if you haven't had experience writing a research question, trying to come up with one. So questions before I move on to how to cite things? All right. So again, a lot of this is review from last week. We talked about, with Amanda, talked about academic publications and trade publications, and I had you look at a bunch of trade publications. There are also general audience publications out there. These are, and a trade publication, it's less specialized than an academic publication, but again, it's not aimed at a general audience. You have to be, I mean, you don't have to be, but you're more likely to be a professional or a real skilled amateur. These aren't things that like are just like impulse buys in the checkout aisle at HEB. General audience publications, these are frequently things that are in the impulse buy checkout aisle at HEB. Magazines, newspapers, websites, and books aimed for people without specialist knowledge. So just general information. We actually used a general audience publication of sorts by looking at prices on Home Depot. Why? You don't need to be a professional contractor to look up and buy stuff at Home Depot, and there are places where you actually have to be a professional to buy stuff. Like there are beauty supply stores where you actually have to be a licensed beautician to buy stuff. A lot of restaurant supply stores do not let you in unless you can you show that you own a restaurant and you set up an account with them and you have to show ID, right? But you have to actually be a restaurant. So they are specialized and limited, and anyone can get stuff at Home Depot. And then there's reference publications. This is a general audience publication that provides broad background knowledge. And Wikipedia is a type of reference publication. And, I know that Wikipedia in particular sort of, gets a bad rap for not entirely unfounded reasons. I certainly don't have anything against it in general. But what I'll say is for this type of report, the knowledge in it is generally too broad. Again, reference publications don't usually get that specific unless, again, they have a certain industry focus. Like my partner, his doctorate is in American history and his focus was on music, specifically blues music. And he has a couple of very specific reference books that are literally just aimed at American music from specific decades. But Wikipedia it does not specialize at all, so it's too broad for a professional document. But if you are having trouble finding resources, a well-written Wikipedia page at the bottom is full of reference entries, and you can go and just try to pick the good ones, right? Don't pick something that just cites, I don't know, a bunch of general news articles. But you can go to those reference entries and find the more specialized stuff in the ACC library. So, you can use that as a starting point to find the actual source. I did that all through college. And this is when Wikipedia was new. I did that all through college. When I was stuck, I would just go to the, and I didn't do it for everything. I did not get all of my sources from there, but if I was really stuck, I would find a Wikipedia article, find something academic that was cited in that article, find that, and then use that as a jumping off point. Again, it wasn't the whole thing. I did not take all of my, every single citation from Wikipedia, but I picked one, and usually by doing that, it really helped me find the other stuff I was looking for. And that while we do classify these things to study them, there's often overlap between categories. So for example, you've heard me mention The Economist before. By its very title, this is not aimed at writing teachers. This is really aimed at economists and business people. So why do I read it? Well, one, I teach technical and business writing. And so this covers a lot about business. It also covers a fair amount about technology. So I actually consider reading this a useful way to stay up to date in the practical real world things happening in these fields. Yes, there are definitely a lot of academic, articles, but academic articles like this comes out every week. academic stuff gets published quarterly. And, you know, a lot of times, you know, editorial decisions for what comes out that quarter are made, you know, 6 months in advance. So this is like, oh, hey, this is what's happening in my industry right now. Also, it does not only cover science and sorry, economics and business stuff. It covers it's got a really broad focus. It covers international news way better than any US publication. It's British. So I read it because being informed of what's going on in the rest of the world is important to me. So though I am not the target audience, this is not so specialized that I, as a lowly non-economic oriented math teacher can yeah, I'm a writing teacher. I'm not an economist, but I can still understand it. So this one actually, like, I mean, it gets pretty specialized. Like on the second to last page, or maybe the third to last page, the last page is always an obituary. Like, look, this third to last page is literally all like economic indexes. I never read this part. I'm not interested. But like, so clearly there is some like real specialist data heavy information in here, but it's still, and so it sort of straddles the line. So it is definitely data heavy. You know, like some of the economic data I get, but like the whole commodity price index, and like, I will never understand that, but it's still, on the whole, it's something I can read. So, you know, just think about that there is often overlap between categories, and that's okay. All right, we already talked a lot about evaluating sources. So just some things to think about. Again, authorship, you know, that is important. And with some of this price data, you're not necessarily going to find like clear specific authorship. You know, like there's no one person going and writing all of the prices for things on the Home Depot website. It's probably an algorithm that's doing that. I mean, you know, it's probably like checked by someone, but it's probably an algorithm doing that. But you could consider Home Depot a corporate author, or so you can consider it a corporate author. That's what I would do. And, you know, again, there are gray areas. This is where we have to use our critical thinking. We say in general, if something doesn't have an author attributed to it, you don't want to use it in a research paper. Generally true. But again, price data, which doesn't necessarily have a specific author, that can be the exception if it's the appropriate information for our assignment. Date, we talked about that. Information has a shelf life. You know, obviously, like, look, price data, like I say 5 to 10 years for some of the more like science oriented data, but you know, price data can be out of date in a week. So, you know, how do you know the information is current? You know, if there is no date. So, and again, you know, the Home Depot site is not going to have like, on this date, this was the price. On this date, this is not going to happen. So again, but we're doing the best we can. And it is worthwhile to remember that essentially, like, this financial data, like the price data, these are estimates. Yeah, I do remember when the price of oil was negative. You know, whenever we're working with things like prices, it's generally good to simply assume that we are working with estimates, because things can change so fast, you know, like this summer when somebody hacked a pipeline on the East Coast and everything went bonkers just within a matter of minutes. Or there was a 4.0 magnitude earthquake in Southeast Missouri yesterday out of nowhere. Or earlier this week, there was a freak storm in Vancouver that caused huge mudslides and buried several dozen cars. Like, I mean, I think they're working, but for a day, like Vancouver was essentially like literally just like closed off from the rest of Canada. Like, it was not possible to get there, to get in or out. So, I mean, literally things can change based on a bad weather day. And those impacts can last for a while. So, it's always good to just say, look, here's this information that I have now. But it is an estimate because we don't know what's going to happen in the future. And that's, that's fine as long as you're upfront about it. I had a student, again, who asked, he said a lot of his data, what he did come from estimates. And I said, that's fine. Because again, who knows what's going to happen? Who knows what's going to happen this afternoon that could, cause, weird supply chain things, right? Just acknowledge that things are estimates. Just acknowledge that the future is uncertain. If you are upfront about that, that's really what matters. It's often good to, acknowledge the motivation behind your source, not between, behind. What's the purpose? Is it informative, persuasive? Is it trying to sell you something? Home Depot is trying to sell you something, but at the same time, it's informative. I would like you to buy this. Here's what it will cost you, as opposed to something like that takes a more manipulative technique. We see this a lot. I talked about the advertorial. I showed one of the, I don't think I showed one of those last week. I think that was 2 weeks ago. I showed you what an advertorial looked like and why they are not, why they are not super, they're just, they're trying to sell you something, but they're not being upfront about that, or that's something I see like a lot of on, I used to see a lot more. I just started literally unfollowing all of these people, whereas like, I'm going to tell you this long story with this beautiful picture. And then if you want to have my life, like join my very expensive mastermind group. And I'm just like, you're just trying to sell me something. Why should I believe your story? Are there specific calls to action? And how does that give clues to motivation? And how does the motivation or purpose affect the reliability of the resource? And, we all have biases. You all do. I do. Some we're conscious of, some we're not conscious of. Like, I would love to say, I have worked through all of my biases and I am totally free of all of them because I am a very elevated person. No, I have not. I have definitely addressed a lot of them, but you don't know what you don't know. So we all have biases. Look, The Economist is full of biases, totally. Super, like, look, capitalism is fine, but they're like, capitalism can do no wrong. Unions are all bad, blah, blah, blah. I disagree with they have a lot of biases and I disagree with a lot of them, but I read it because I actually get something, useful out of it, which is, generally good information about the world and about my field that I'm not going to get from a lot of US publications. Anyway, so how does that affect the reliability of the resource? So for me, if I'm like citing something from if I want to cite something from The Economist, what am I going to do? Well, I will probably cite, I'll probably cite one of the straight up news articles, but not cite one of the editorials. Editorials are opinion pieces. And, that doesn't mean you could never cite an opinion piece. It means you need to think about the context in which citing an opinion piece would be appropriate. Anyway, relevance. Is the source relevant to the research question you are trying to answer? Again, your sources always have to link to your research question. And then is all of the information within the document or podcast or video, is it all consistent? Does the creator avoid going off on tangents? Are there any like logical flaws in their argument? Like just because something is put out like professionally published doesn't mean it doesn't have like logical fallacies in it. We see this, I see this all the time. You need both internal and external cohesion. The source needs to be internal within itself. It needs to have a strong internal structure and logic, and it also needs to be cohesive with reality. If you want to if you want to do things that are not cohesive with reality, I can recommend some great creative writing courses for your postmodern novel. All right. So what is a reference list? It is a list of everything you read for your report, even if you don't quote or paraphrase it directly in your document. So So everything. Now, so this differs from a works cited page, which if you have had to take an English class and use MLA format, that's what you use. Works cited only lists works that you have quoted or paraphrased in your report. And since all of my, academic life was done in MLA, none of my work life, all of my academic life, for my my undergrad thesis and my master's thesis and my big master's exam, where it was like just a take-home research paper that you had 48 hours to do. I had a works cited of everything I'd quoted or paraphrased. And then I had a works consulted of everything else I'd read that I didn't quote or paraphrase. Because look, sometimes you do read things and you're like, this is useful information, but it's not something I need to quote directly. So the reference list in APA just condenses those two into one as a sort of one-stop shop to acknowledge the full scope of your research. And then, it just provides the reader with easy to access information about what you read, watched, or listened to so they can find it for themselves. We are using APA format in this class. The library has APA references. They're great. The OWL at Purdue has a whole APA sample reference list, which I linked to their APA guide at the end of this slideshow. Start your reference list on its own page. Reference entries go in alphabetical order by last name. Corporate organizational authors, obviously you wouldn't use last name, first name, you just type the company name. I say obviously, I know that's not inherently obvious. I've just been doing it for so many years that I forget that people don't know that. And please note this specific method of indentation in the screenshot. The first line is flush with the margin and the subsequent lines are indented. Now, for most word processors these days, this is a thing I do not like. It never used to be this way. It was a long time ago. It didn't use back in my day. So if you run onto a subsequent line, it'll default to putting that subsequent line flush left, as it should. But then if you put the cursor at your second line and hit your tab key, it'll pull the whole source over. So what you do is you put your cursor right at the second line, then you hit your enter or return key, and to tell the computer there needs to be a hard break here, then you hit the tab key and it works. Some example reference entries. This is from a trade journal, author's last name, first initial, the year, article title. Notice that there are no quotation marks. No quotation marks. Title, italics, volume and issue number, page number. All right, here's an article from a website, Sammy R, 2021, June 21. I will say I did make a mistake here. This should not be italicized. The title should be plain text, and TechCrunch should be italicized, because we just sort of treat it like it's the name of a magazine. So that's my bad. I screwed up. Okay, so how to land the top spot in Google search with featured snippets in 2021, TechCrunch, then the URL. Ideally, this is indented over to match with this. It is the length of the URL and the constraints of PowerPoint that I could not make that work, unless I shrunk that down a lot, and then it just looked weird. Okay, you do notice I have more information here than I had up here. Well, this, by the fact that we're already at issue 9, I can guess this comes out every month. And since there's a set volume and issue number, I don't need a more specific date. You just need the volume and issue number. And the year. Well, here, TechCrunch updates on the daily. There's no specific volume or issue numbers. So, they ask that you put the actual date that it first appeared, because there is no other information like this to help you. So like I said earlier, standards change. You used to in APA have to put the retrieval date, not just the publication date, but also the retrieval date. for each source. You do not have to do that anymore. They stopped that about 2 years ago. So if you see something that tells you that in APA you need a retrieval date, you do not. All right, here is a YouTube video. I thought it'd probably be good for you to see one of those. You're not necessarily using them for this assignment, but you know what? It's good to know how to cite a YouTube video. So here, this person does not post under their legal name. They post under a screen name or a pseudonym or whatever. So I just do it that I just you type the screen name as is, the Q, not Q comma the, just the Q. The year. Now here the title is italicized because even a YouTube video is considered a standalone film. So like Casablanca or The French Connection or Nightmare on Elm Street. I was about to be like Nightmare on 34th Street. No, that's Miracle on 34th Street. So it is considered an actual film, just like anything you might see in a theater. So that's why you put it in italics. We do in brackets indicate that it is a video format. You would do that for a podcast too. We do want to indicate what platform it's on and then include the URL. Finally, here's a book. Winchester S, 2018. Book title, you notice the whole title, because it's a standalone work, is in italics. William Collins is the publisher. And with books, you only need the year because ultimately no one cares what month something came out. I mean, it's just like, it's not considered that it matters, you know? Books are not considered so up to the minute that you need that, you know? With magazines, trade journals, academic journals, you want the volume and issue number. And with stuff that updates literally every day, you want to include a little more information. Now, in-text citations, these are shorthand. They're a way to inform the reader you got this information from another source, and then where they can find that source in your reference page. Full reference entries take up a lot of space, so it would not be efficient to include them in the text itself. Now, I do want to note that some systems do use footnotes. APA generally does not, except in some specific circumstances, so we're not using footnotes in this class. So for in-text citations, 3 main pieces of information: author's last name, publication year, and then either the page number or type out the letters URL to signal that the source is from the internet. You already have some experience with that from captioning graphics. Important thing to note also is that the period goes outside of the parentheses, not inside the quotation marks. Yeah, and the switching to URL to indicate an online source, again, is relatively recent. So some examples. In the past decade, the number of holdings in England has fallen by 1/5, reflecting dwindling incomes, consolidation, and also definitional changes. The Economist 2021, page 51. Since there is no specific author, I just use a periodical name. Well, and they're a corporate author, so that would be fine. I do not use a more detailed date because, again, this is shorthand. The more detailed date would go in the reference page. You should have a reference page using all of the sources you looked at. So you have looked at least 2 things, so you should include one at the end. If you don't have one today, that's okay. Just write it up by Sunday. And you are allowed to use a citation generator. That's fine. Keep in mind that citation generators are not perfect. So for example, now I haven't checked in 6 months, but the last I checked 6 months ago, the generator in Microsoft Word had not been updated to reflect current standards for APA. In fact, like they're really old, like it hasn't been updated in a while. Now, again, I haven't checked in 6 months, but it hadn't been updated. Or sometimes the software, like if you're looking at an article, like if it's like spitting out a citation for like a PDF that is like, and the title is all in caps, it will then often just put the title all in caps, even though clearly we do not want that. So you can definitely use a citation generator. I have no problem with that. Please also still know the basics of the form so you can just double check it and correct any mistakes. That's all I ask. Don't give me any reference entries with all caps. Or sometimes it'll like spit it out and like everything will be in a different font. Make it all the same font. Like just know the basics enough so you can correct, account for any deficiencies in the software. So here's one from the internet where again, Coldewey, so that's the last name, 2021, and then I do URL. And again, this is from a source, I think that might have also been TechCrunch, updated daily. But again, shorthand. Putting all of that information up here is just going to interrupt the flow of the paper. It's going to look weird. It's going to take up space. So I do the shorthand and then I put the full information in the reference page. So now again, this PowerPoint is in the Unit 7 content folder. There's a link to the full APA guide from the OWL at Purdue. It is free. It is all text-based. They actually have some videos, supplemental videos. Library tutorials and ways to contact our fantastic ACC reference librarians. They will not do your work for you, but they are very helpful and nice. So, all right. Last questions on that? It is time for peer critique. If you do not have a draft ready to go, please send me a private message right now. All right, thank you for letting me know. Okay. 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 Thank you. All right. So I did open up 5 rooms because we have enough for like 2, 2, and 2. So those of you who are not fully ready, you are going to go into just separate rooms and I'll come. So 2 of you are in room 1, 2 of you are in room 2. I will come in and just check in with you, you to help you out. Rooms 3 through 5, you are all in pairs for peer critique. I assume you know how to do this now, so have fun.